else will try and accommodate that. Now, in order to shift gears and start moving into our presentation, I'd like to bring up Ms. Kristine Hejna. Chris is a quality professional who came to us by way of Southern California. She and her husband, they left the West because the East was where all the jobs were, particularly folks who are doing government type work. Chris has been around the quality game for a number of years, and I'll let her discuss earned value management, something that we hear more and more of, and we need to become more and more expert on. So without further ado, Chris.
I believe I'm wired for sound. Everybody hear me okay? What I'm really going to give you is a super condensed, especially now, version of the PMI practice guide. What they call a standard practice manual for a lot of the things that project managers do. And the practice guide for earned value management is long, and it has 2 chapters on previous revisions and who worked on them and what they said. And I'm going to leave those topics out entirely. I'm going to be mostly talking about why you want to know about earned value, go over that. And then I'm going to talk about the basics of earned value, stepping through planning, doing your original estimate, and then using it for forecasting, which is really where the value is, and then going through the pitfalls. And I think they actually call it pitfalls in the practice guide. There's things that can go wrong, things you need to be careful of. And as part of being a quality professional, a lot of times you're expected to evaluate how things are going, and you're just expected to know a lot of stuff. I know when I worked, first got in quality with Northrop, with TRW at the time I joined, worked as a quality manager, and they sure enough expected me to be able to say whether things were good or bad about anything. Just tell me. Oh, it's gone idle again. Yes. My device is offline. Yes, I know. Okay. Without looking, I will now move the slides. Yeah, sure enough, it worked. Anyway, what I just said. So part of setting up EVM is the after the basics, there's the issues, and the specific issues are the estimate complete, estimate to complete. People have a lot of trouble with that. Some of the different value and cost calculations are areas where people can have choices and aren't aware of what the choices are, and they affect the results a great deal. CPI and SPI as indices versus using just the variance, and EVM and alternate life cycle models. And then the summary thing where I tell you what I told you. So I don't know whether any of you can even see this at all, but it's a graph with a kind of an S-curve on it, which is the standard shape for predicting your spending across a program. Starts out low, ramps up a bunch, and then kind of levels off again and then ends. So you'd expect that to be the curve that your spending follows. And so you look at how much you have to spend and that you got from the people who did your proposal. And you look at how much you have to do and you think, oh my God, never going to happen. So you do a new one, and that becomes your baseline and the final value is your baseline at complete. This is what you're aiming for. You're aiming to have finished this many things with good quality by this date for this amount of money. So that's what this curve represents, is your spend versus accomplishment on money, time. So you add a few more lines onto that as you start tracking how much you've spent and how much you've gotten done, and see whether you're getting done the amount you thought in the time you would, and spending the amount you thought in the time you would. And those are actually two separate lines. In this graph, the green one is the schedule line, how much time it's taking to do things. And in this one, it's taking longer than it should. I think that's what I drew. Anyway, it's taking longer than it should to accomplish the work and costing more for that amount of work than it was supposed to, but you're not spending at the rate you thought because you aren't having, it's probably happens a lot at the beginning of programs, you aren't staffed adequately or something like that. So you're underrunning costs, people aren't doing enough, and you have to figure out what's going to happen. And what happens here is you draw your little line and you try to decide whether you can recover from this, whether there were any mistakes you made in planning it, things like that. So you're trying to do your estimate complete. You're gonna say, well, how much money now is it going to take me to finish from here? The estimate to complete can be done with three different kinds of calculations. You can choose to assume things are going to go the way they've been going, which is what's most likely to happen, but makes people feel bad. You can assume you're going to fix things, which is one of the most popular things to plan. Everything will be better. And you can replan from this point, which nobody wants you to do because you've already, published a baseline and you have to get permission to do a replan. Yes?
But at some point, you cannot recover.
That's right.
You've got so much work to do, so few people, going 24 hours in a day.
Right.
At some point, you just gotta.
Right. And so that, actually it was on the previous slide never mind. Yes, there's a statement, is this possible without divine intervention? Because you're supposed to notice early on if you're underrunning. The thing that people getting into the issues here is if you don't take care of these things the way you need to, is EVM does not provide the benefits it's supposed to. You want to have a forecast. You want to know when you're going to spend the money, when you're going to get the work done, whether you're going to be on time or not. There's a lot of trying to be predictable in this, just like there is trying to be consistent with your production lines, with statistical process control. You're trying to show that your financial management is under control. When Northrop Grumman bought TRW, one of the two sectors, had a really great quarter right after Northrop bought them. And when it was reported, the stock went down because it showed that Northrop and TRW had no clue what was happening. They didn't have a good enough understanding of their financials, which was key to your company being successful in the market, is being able to predict. So the predictions you make with your EVM are really a very clear and important part of running a business. Plus, of course, when you're working with the big customer around here, they have to go ask for their money. You have to make arrangements with them all the time about when you're going to get your money and things like that. And so you make sure that you have some reasonable amount of predictability. Everybody looks bad if you mess up. So you want to make sure you're doing your calculations right, not just blindly applying the EVMS. EVMS is required for contracts over a certain size, but it doesn't apply neatly. It can't just be blindly cranked through. As it says here, there are choices to make, and it's not easy. You have to train people. So, those choices were replan, assume the best, as I said, is very popular. Assume no change is very easy, but the replan is the one that gives you the better results. But you don't just replan everything blindly. You, and this is a list of available calculations and circumstances under which you apply them. And I would recommend that if you're actually going to do the actual EVMS work yourself, is that you go get that practice guide. But I'm trying to make you aware of the fact that there is a list of conditions and a set of different calculations that go with those conditions, so that you end up with the right kind of result. So in cost management, different situations. Oh, yes?
Value formulas, and I myself couldn't keep them all in my head at once because they all look kind of similar. But I think it's helpful to know if you do a formula, you plug in the numbers, and you find if you're high, then this means bad or good. If you're low, this means bad or good.
Right. There's it depends. It's people really want to say, if this, then that, and your whole program isn't operating the same. Nearly always, for instance, your project management is an LOE task. You don't want to replan that task. You're probably on track with the LOE tasks. If you're not, you didn't staff. It's something like that, and its fix is different. It is a replan, you continue with that line. Your some of the situations in some of the other tasks, one of the things that happens is towards the end of projects, the schedule index, the schedule performance index approaches 1 because you're going to approach the end date. And it's just a mathematical thing. And in Europe, they adjust for that. They use a different method. Here in the US, particularly the DoD, has said don't use that method. Calculate SPI the same way the whole life cycle, even though it doesn't mean much at the end. And I'm not sure why that is. I can't say it's in anybody's benefit. That's a whole chapter on that in the guide as well. 3 different kinds of calculations. You can choose to assume things are going to go the way they've been going, which is what's most likely to happen, but makes people feel bad. You can assume you're going to fix things, which is one of the most popular things to plan. Everything will be better. And you can replan from this point, which nobody wants you to do because you've already, published a baseline and you have to get permission to do a replan. Yes?
But at some point, you cannot recover.
That's right.
You've got so much work to do, so few people, 24 hours in advance.
Right.
At some point, you just gotta.
Right. And so that, actually it was on the previous slide is, oh well, never mind. Yes, there's another page. Discrete allocation of large costs is another place where things go bad. You're going along and it's time to buy your shipment of metal to make your airplane. Plunk. There goes a bunch of costs. Because you're using an index, it's going to look just totally messed up when you do that. So you want to allocate your costs, even though it's kind of an artificial thing, to get your to keep your EVMS looking right. And sometimes you'll go into a briefing where you're sitting in and your project manager is talking to his boss, talking about something wrong, and you can tell your project manager is sweating because the EVMS graph looks all wrong. And if you can be involved and be aware of what kind of things could go wrong, you can make your project manager a very happy person. And so that's what you kind of want to do. You have to choose how you do some of these things, understanding that you want to make sure all the costs get allocated and that they've been in the plan to be allocated and that you line things up in a way that makes sense. But there's times when it isn't truly going to match reality because reality isn't good for the math you've been asked to use. So like I said, with the schedule management issues, there's that boundary condition of time marches on. You get to the end and things, it approaches 1. It's a ratio when you're doing an index rather than just the variance between what you planned and what you said you're going to do. People like to see the indices. It's a little easier for a lot of people to work with because when you say, I'm $20 million off, and you have a $20 billion program, well, hey, who cares?
Only until you start talking about real money.
Right. That's, if you're 1% off, if you're, but on a smaller program, some of these numbers make a bigger difference. And so that's why they use the index, is to have it be a percent of your total cost, to have it represented that way. But the index, because you're doing the ratios, runs into calculation problems. Sometimes what happens with schedules, particularly, is people start charging. The contract is open. They don't do anything. You have costs, but no earned value. The program starts, nobody charges. You get delivered from a previous contract some work that makes it look like you've accomplished something, and nobody's charged anything. You have a divide by zero. You have to be aware of possibilities for things like this and actually look at the math. Now, I'm a person who has a math background, and I was never at Claremont McKenna. I was at Claremont Graduate University in Industrial Applied Math, PhD program that I started and didn't finish. But I was a math major and took an MBA and thought that, quantitative management was the neatest thing, and just a shame that nobody uses it. But so in this briefing, when you get a chance to look at it, it has these conditions of divide bys, things where the numbers come out wrong. And the other thing, as I said, I'd be getting to is EVM and the alternate life cycle models. EVM was designed for waterfall. This is a DoD thing primarily, where you're building a satellite, even several satellites, or an aircraft carrier. You finish your design, you finish your requirements, decide what it is you're trying to accomplish, you finish your design, how you're going to accomplish those, then you go out and acquire the action. Then you perform the engineering. Then you build things. Not until after you've figured out what you want. They don't want any immature technology when they're contracting these things. They really want to have it all settled, particularly with satellites. You finish them before they launch, because you can't finish them later. So, and that's where I have experience, is on satellite programs. And the waterfall, EVM works great over the course of a waterfall. You could say, yes, I finished my design, I had my PDR, I did my detailed design, I had my CDR, I'm going to have my milestone events when they're scheduled. You have a checklist of things you were supposed to accomplish, and you got them done, and that matches up with how much you were supposed to spend and how much you're supposed to get paid. That's great. And now there's a bunch of agile stuff. There's a lot of software development. There's I'm not sure what I want. Let's try it and see if that is it. And that doesn't work so well for EVM. Oh, that's for that matter, IDIQ doesn't work for EVM, but it's still a required thing on a lot of contracts. And so you have to adjust it. You have to come up with a way of adjusting it that you and DCMA and everybody's going to be content with. And so you look at the what you're going to, you rearrange your schedule and look at what done is at various stages. And yes, there we go. This is a life cycle, neatly stepping down time across the bottom. So this is, how spirals or other incremental versions might work, where you decide what with the requirements, how with the design, and then you build it. And then you decide what to do in the next piece and how you're going to do it, and then you build it. And you have to decide if these are long cycles, what the completion criteria are there, and how you're going to tell, and decide how you're going to tell when you've got it fully defined enough to work from and build, or in the case of the really interactive agiles, the extreme programming, these things are looped together and you really kind of come out, but those are usually by definition very short cycles. So you don't only take earned value on a single what's the word? Sprint. Yes. You'd only take earned value on a single sprint. And so you'd work it that way. You don't do it over the whole thing. You have to decide, but you still have to take some things into account. One of the things that doesn't, well, let's see here. Getting out of order with my slides here, I can tell. So looks the same way, but this is parallel subsystems. These would be things all being done at once that might have to be replanned. This is an example of like a satellite system where there's communication satellite, Milstar, advanced EHF, whatever. It's, some subcontractor is doing the spacecraft, somebody's doing the case, somebody's doing the wiring harness, somebody's doing the modem. So there's modulate, demodulate activities. There's antennas and antenna control and pointing and stuff like that. Somebody else is doing the addressing. Stuff comes in, who do I route it to? And all those things are going on in parallel, and they're going to be on separate boards in the satellite, running on separate processors. And somebody else is designing the chips for those. One of the things that happened with advanced EHF, the government said, oh yeah, well, you're only doing a few of these. Why would we pay for custom silicon? Use FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays. And then they came back, after everything's underway and said, sorry, we're going to have to pay for custom silicon, build, because FPGAs don't actually last with cosmic rays. They don't stand up in space. So that's a change. It's a lot harder to design a custom chip, and it certainly has different timing and all of this. And so the hardware people had to go back to plan A, and they said, well, this is not going to affect the software people any, is it? Well, as a matter of fact, it does. They tried really hard not to admit, but there's things to watch out for. And so you might some of this might be going along fine, and your EVMS looks not too bad, but some of it might totally be hosed. And so you only want to replan the totally hosed part and not the part that's fine. And so you want to know enough about what's going on in the program and how the schedules work and what the shapes are so that you look at the right things and fix those. So incremental life cycles work kind of like that, where we're going to do a little bit, see how that works out. We're going to do, and you plan, we're going to do a little bit more, see how that works out. And that's really hard to do with earned value, and yet it's an expected life cycle for many kinds of products now. So you have to, again, have somebody really thinking about how that's going to work. And one of the things that happens, particularly in this kind of model, is people fail to take into account rework, which we all know happens, especially with software. Not as much as we like it, it's not right the first time. And if you have called something done and taken credit for it, where do you put the rework? So you have to have a separate line item in the next increment that's called rework, so that you don't mess up your previous ones. You're separate, you're accounting for separate increments. And that's considered the preferred method for using EVMS in things where there's potential for rework, is you actually have it as one of the items in that stage that has to be completed. You don't pretend it's not going to happen.
Do you think the earned value conflicts with the low documentation ethos of Agile? Just do as little documentation as you need.
One of the Agile actually is intended to have most of the implementations, the Scrum methods, things like that. They're intended that you would have user participation all through development. When you don't have that, you still need documentation. And it's very hard to get many customers to sit with you through the, oh yeah, that looks good. Plus, you do things incrementally in situations like your hardware has just changed from being an FPGA to being a chip. And you have to update your software as they gradually design that chip. And that's agile, but still needs documentation. You need to have a full interface control document. You need to have all of that documented. You need to be working very closely with the other part, but there's no user. You build things without, I have as manager of embedded systems development, there's no users. You don't ask anybody. You ask the machine, are we talking to you or not? You develop tests, you put stuff in and, it's write down manually, test people and the quality people and write down, okay, stuff this in and 20 cycles later, this is what we're expecting out again. And you write that down and the test people would run it and the quality people got to watch and make sure and count the lines in between to make sure that 20 cycles later is when the actual output came out. Love doing that. And, it's an incremental life cycle. It looks like Agile on a schedule, but it doesn't lend itself to EVMS very well. But you still are expected to do it because, satellites aren't coming in that cheap price tag that doesn't require EVMS. And you need to fully document it because when you move into O&M, when they launch, some other contractor gets to take over the contract. They're going to have to know how everything works, what happens. AHF is going to move into, their Millstar moved into AHF, needed a full set of documentation. AHF is supposed to move into whatever it was. It got canceled because Advanced AHF is only just, Millstar's outlasted itself. Advanced AHF is likely to last longer than they originally planned as well. So they aren't in any rush to do a follow-on for that after all. But they're always planning for what the next thing is going to be. And so EVMS on government contracts, which is mostly where you use it, you still need to do everything in order to satisfy the post-delivery needs.
The Project Management Institute has an Agile group coming
Right.
from, they had 2 days ago. Thank you. The local chapter of the Project Management Institute has a new group of folks interested in Agile. They had a meeting 2 days ago over at
Talk right into it.
Sorry. How's
Talk
that?
at the.
Is this thing better? How's that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. PMI has an Agile group. They met over 2 days ago over at AOL in Dulles. And one of the speakers made an anecdote that he said he was working for an organization that said, we're going to do Agile. And they said, the guy who was in charge, the chief information officer, said, Agile is the way. And it's apparently the contracting officer stood up and said, it's a firm fixed price contract, and you're going to document every jot and tittle of the thing, So they must have, and the guy wouldn't surrender the microphone, which I will. So there was this conflict back and forth between documentation, no documentation, that sort of thing.
Okay. That seems like an interesting thing. Well, with firm fixed, the contracting officers have to learn better how to do that because they're wrong the way most of them want to do it. Firm fixed should be, you deliver this stuff, this is what you get paid, end of story. That isn't, they're also used to checking to make sure there's butts on seat, there's hours spent, there's stuff. If they contracted for the documentation and it's in the deliverables list, they're owed the documentation. If they didn't, they don't. They have to cough up more for that because that's another activity. And whether it's an agile, an incremental, an evolutionary, or snap my fingers and it appears out of the air, if you deliver the deliverables, you get paid. Because that's what firm fixed is supposed to be. It's supposed to be risk reduction for the government. It's replacing cost plus, which used to be, oh, you wanted that. Well, that'll be a little more. And things like that, because that was the old business model. When I started Six Sigma at Northrop Grumman, I'd go around saying, I can save you money on your projects. And they'd say, that's a bad thing. The problem is not to save money on the contracts. So firm fixed is supposed to get around that. Everybody's supposed to want to save money on the contracts because it's good for everybody. But yeah, that's those CORs. I need to be retrained. I've worked with some that are good, and others that are not so comfortable. And a lot of them are really afraid to stand up to their technical representative on the programs, the person who actually knows what to do. They don't know how it works, and they're trying to make sure the government's getting their value for the money, which I'm pleased with. I'm a taxpayer, but they the proposal, the way it was structured, the way the contract was structured is supposed to be how you define what value for your money is, not how you execute. So anyway, I'm pretty near the end here. And I have to tell you, one of the things I do when I'm an audience is I look at what the person said they were going to try to do and see whether they're staying on track. I'm doing earned value on their briefings the whole time they're doing it. Let's see here. They spent half the time, they're not halfway through the slides yet. This is bad, but I don't know about any special circumstances. They've spent half the time because they had a video in there that took 15 minutes. And they only have a few minutes left. Or they might have had a really fast first part. And I think, oh, they're going to be done in 20 minutes. And it turns out there's a video they haven't tried embedded in the second half. So there's all kinds of things you have to watch out for that may be unexpected and affecting how you're doing your earned value calculations. And so that's what I'm trying to tell you to watch out for, is that each aspect is not the same. They don't progress at the same rate. The earned value initial S-curve on the time money axis is an ideal situation. by doing a good detailed plan, so what's supposed to happen when, and spreading things out to make it look as much like an S as possible so you can use your indices. That's when you get a better result. And a lot of people try to get away with doing it quick and easy because we're all trying to do things quick and easy. But it's worth the effort. And again, can make your project manager feel a lot better if you say, hey, I know where that kind of problem comes from. You didn't do anything wrong except for how you made your chart, how you made your plan, how you documented your plan. So, in summary, I've tried to tell you what EVMS is used for, why it's good, and what goes wrong, and how to recognize it. Any questions? Yes? Mr. Questions here, acting for the whole audience.
Well, I came a long way, so I'm getting my money's worth. Just kidding. I'm curious to know what software you would use for doing the earned value calculations. Maybe Microsoft Project. I know the 2010 version of Project did a bit of earned value. I would hate to do project management with Excel. I know there's some packages that do agile management, like a Rally software and version 1. Other software packages that do earn value for you.
I've seen earned value done with Microsoft Project, and it requires, well, you get out of it what you put into it. You put a lot into it, you get a better quality output, like so many other things in life. And I would recommend using at least the outputs from a project management tool, because that is where you're going to get how much work you've done, how much schedule you've done, and it will. What it does is it calculates your variances, and your variances are actually what you're using for true earned value management. Did I get as much done as I thought I would? Did I spend as much time as I thought I would? And how much money's worth of stuff did I get done? Am I underrunning schedule, underrunning budget, overrunning schedule, but doing okay on budget? I mean, if I'm spending a lot of money and getting a lot done, maybe I'm just going to be done early, right? You can't just say one thing's good, one thing's bad. You have to look at the rates and compare the things for each kind of task. So I'd say absolutely use the project management tool. Don't try to do it in Excel. I don't do project management. If I'm going to do any project management, even small, even like Six Sigma projects, I use a project. But besides being a Six Sigma person, I'm a PMP. But I got my PMP experience, by the way, for anybody who's thinking of that. The Six Sigma projects are projects that have short but complete life cycles. And so they make good history, good evidence for experience in the complete life cycle of a project for completing your PMP application. I've completed 10 projects. They were 1 year long. Or, complete 10 projects in 1 year. But you've gotten through the whole life cycle. You've done the initiation, you've done the planning, you've done the execute, the monitor and control, and the closure. You've gone through that whole process with a good Six Sigma project, so it makes it really great for your PMP.
I just wondered, in terms of who does earned value benefit the most? In theory, you'd think in a perfect world, it would be for the benefit of the company that's producing the product. And since you said mostly it's required by government, what's the trade-off? It costs money for the contractor or company to do it. So is it really benefiting the company that much, or is it really to show the government how well the company is doing something? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's actually been studies done, and earned value management is quite expensive. And sometimes quality isn't free. You want to know what's going wrong. And one of the things, because I was involved in a lot of these things in some of these projects, a lot of different roles, I was on these satellite projects, and I was the process person. And I was expected to see when the EVMS stuff was going wrong or not. And the operations lead of the program would come to me and say, this is not going well. Run a Six Sigma project on it. Every little thing that went wrong became a Six Sigma project. And then it became corrective and preventative action. And then it became prediction stuff. And that project got us CMMI level 5 that way. Because we got to the point where we knew how many defects within 10% we were going to get in any given week of software during any part of the life cycle. Because there was actually turns out to be, if you look at things, predictable. I stratified by teams. Some teams were working with all new software. Some teams were working with reused software from Millstar. Some teams were, working more with their hardware groups than others and resolving these things kind of behind the scenes. But I learned what each team's rate was. Put that in. When we had a problem where people were whining about how hard it was to test some of the hardware. Oh, gee, the test systems are in a classified room and we can't, if we can use them remotely, but if we mess up and they need rebooting, we have to go down and get into this classified room, and most of us aren't on the door. And so we ran a Six Sigma project to fix that. And that would have caused an overrun. That would have caused a schedule delay. And so we knew that it was worth spending a certain amount of money to fix that problem so that we could stay on track with the program. Because we had EVMS to see that this was in fact affecting things. The EVMS was a way of getting the before state metrics for some things in the program. Because you have your metrics collection there of how much time and money is being spent on things. You know what tasks are supposed to be done. You know what people have been doing. It's part of your normal data collection to complete your EVMS. And so finding that kind of problem and fixing it can be very beneficial. And without checking for those variances fairly frequently during the life of the program and not taking the developer's word for, oh yeah, it's done. Well, developers think it's done when they ran it once and it did what it was supposed to. Not they've tried it 3 times with all the possible things that could go wrong in boundary conditions. Not they've tried it 400 times with the range of values that could happen. Not they've tried it talking to the actual equipment. They call it done when I'm finished coding and it compiled and it ran. I've been a developer, I know this. So having the EVMS as a reality check on what's really happening can be really valuable that way too, to the program. Just like having corrective and preventative action, just like doing CMMI. If you're doing all of it in the spirit in which it's intended, it's good for you. So someone who gets paid to do that. Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you, Chris. You're getting off easy tonight. Earned value management is a tool. Agile is a tool. Six Sigma is a tool. CMMI is a tool. Auditing is a tool. Lean is a tool. How do we harness all these things together? Well, seems like there has to be a lot of management by walking around, because otherwise you're going to get lost in the EVM calculations aren't going to make sense, or they're going to be out of kilter. There's going to be wrong interpretations. And this means that every employee, everybody connected in with whatever the program or the project is, has to understand what the goal is. And if you go downtown to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, they are still the best example. It didn't matter what job anybody had in the building. Every employee, secretary, cafeteria worker, janitor, scientist, secretary, loading dock specialist, they all said, my job is to put an astronaut in the moon. And everybody worked to that goal. And there was an open sharing of information. There was none of this, I have a secret. When you have an environment and a culture that everybody understands in a very simple term, what the message, what the mission is, EVM works marvelously, especially when you bring in all the other requisite tools to keep things on track. Chris, thank you very much for giving us insights into EVS that we haven't had before. In Chris's notes that are on the web, she gives you the complete, unabridged notes that go with every slide. If you have a question, feel free to contact her.
Yeah,
And if you have a
I would
problem,
have read if I'd had one screen to project and one screen to look at.
yeah. And if you even need more help after that, Chris is amenable to contracting out to you. Thank you very much. We will be meeting in Tyson's Corner at the Olive Garden on February 10th. Look forward to seeing as many of you who can make it. Thank you for being here tonight. Good night.